Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the soot-covered, smog-choked world of Victorian hygiene, a place where the air smells of horse manure, chimney soot, and faint despair, and where personal cleanliness is less of a routine and more of a distant dream. You're standing in a narrow alleyway in 1850s London. The cobblestones beneath your boots squelch in something that is most definitely not just rainwater, the air, thick as gravy and twice as questionable. It clings to your clothes, your hair, even your eyelashes. You've barely taken 3 breaths, and already you're craving a deep clean that won't come for another week. Maybe, if the water isn't full of disease. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1851. Queen Victoria is on the throne, and the Industrial Revolution is at full tilt. London is swelling like a bad knee, with people cramming into every conceivable space. Tenements stack up against each other like books on an unstable shelf. The population is booming, but public sanitation, not so much. As you trudge through the streets, your boots encounter a patchwork of old hay ash and animal waste. That's not an accident. It's there to soak up the constant deluge of horse droppings, spilled beer, and the occasional human waste bucket dumped from a window above. Yes, that smell wafting through the air. A pungent cocktail of humanity's byproducts. It's so bad, in fact, that smell blindness becomes a survival tactic. Your nose overwhelmed by the sheer bouquet of rot and sweat just sort of gives up. And so do you, honestly. But what if I told you? The worst was yet to come. The infamous Great Stink of 1858 is still a few years away. But the signs are already there. River Thames. The city's proud artery has become a moving soup of excrement and industrial runoff. It gleams in the sunlight like a sewage slick, because that's exactly what it is. People living near the river have started stuffing their curtains with lime-soaked cloth to keep the stink out. Spoiler, it doesn't help. Back alleys where the working poor live are even worse. With no running water and no sewer connections, human waste is collected in pots night soil and either stored until it overflows or chucked into the street under cover of darkness. It's not uncommon to hear the call, Gardez Low French, for watch out for the water, as a warning before a pot is emptied from a window. Historians still argue whether urban Victorians were truly indifferent to the stench or just trapped by poverty and infrastructure. But one thing's clear, they weren't nose-blind by choice. Oddly enough, wealthier neighborhoods don't fare much better. While the rich might have servants to carry away chamber pots and scrub floors, they're just as vulnerable to foul air and bad plumbing. Indoor plumbing is still a novelty, and many wealthy homes rely on cesspools, literally pits of waste dug beneath the house. Elegant, meanwhile, in public, you can find a curious new invention, the urine trough. Yes, a low wall, with a trench at the base, placed helpfully along busy streets. Just in case you were worried, the smell wasn't democratic. If you were to ask a Victorian doctor about the danger of this fetid air, you'd get a solemn lecture on miasmas, those invisible clouds of rotting matter believed to cause everything from cholera to headaches. The solution: burn incense, hang flowers, splash some lavender water on your face, and hope for the best. Yet despite it all, life churns on. Children play in the muck street, vendors shout over the chaos, and you, clutching your kerchief to your nose, press forward through a world that somehow manages to be both vibrant and vomitous. And thus begins our deep dive into the quirks, myths, and grim realities of Victorian hygiene. It's going to get weirder, and yes, probably smellier. Think the streets were bad. Wait until you see how people lived inside. You've made it through the sludge of the streets, and now you're ducking into a modest London flat, maybe 5 stories up, where a family of 6 squeezes into 2 small rooms. There's no running water, no indoor plumbing, and certainly no gleaming clawfoot tub waiting behind a curtain. You're sticky from the soot. Your collar smells like coal smoke, and your underarms are best not described in polite company. Naturally, you ask, when's bath time? The short answer, not anytime soon. Bathing in Victorian England was a complex affair, less daily, self-care routine, and more logistical nightmare. Most working-class families didn't own a bath at all. If they were lucky, they had a portable tin tub, usually kept under the bed or hanging on a hook in the stairwell. Once a week, or once every 2 weeks, if water was scarce, they'd haul it out, heat water on the stove, and begin the awkward ritual. But don't get too excited. Heating water was labor-intensive, and keeping it hot was near impossible. That meant the entire household might share the same bathwater in a sequence that probably didn't favor the youngest or cleanest going first. The water starts off warm and clear, ends up lukewarm, and let's just say character-filled. You settle into that tub, knees jammed to your chest with your ankles draped over the rim like tired laundry. The air is humid, tinged with coal smoke and whatever stew someone's boiling nearby. There's no candlelit serenity here, just the slosh of gray water and the feeling that someone else's dirt is now your dirt. And if you think the upper classes were scrubbing down every day in perfumed bliss, think again. Even wealthier Victorians weren't bathing regularly, not by today's standards. A sponge bath was more common, involving a basin of tepid water, a square of linen, and a lot of awkward contorting. Full immersion was reserved for when the weather was especially hot or when society demanded it. Historians still debate just how often people truly bathed, especially outside of London. Some diaries suggest weekly washing, while others hint at months going by. Rural areas lagged even further behind, with bathing tied to superstition and seasonal rituals. In some parts of the countryside, spring cleaning wasn't just for the home. It was the only time of year the entire family got a full wash. What if I told you bathing publicly was once scandalous? Then there's the public bathhouse, a revolutionary idea that was at first considered radical. Early bathhouses were met with suspicion. What if they encouraged immoral behavior? Or worse, undermined the social order by letting the poor feel clean? Still, these institutions slowly gained ground thanks to reformers who saw hygiene as a moral imperative. A clean body, they argued, was a clean soul. Eventually, entire bath and wash houses were built with philanthropic backing, offering a hot soak for a penny and a clean shirt for tuppence. But even then, pride got in the way. Some working-class folks were too embarrassed to be seen using a public bath, afraid it meant they couldn't afford to wash at home. Of course, not bathing at all came with its own challenges. Skin ailments were rampant. Lice were routine companions. And while germ theory wasn't widely accepted yet, people knew something was off. They could feel it itching, oozing, scratching. The body rebelled in little ways. To compensate dry cleaning, the body became popular. That's right, you'd rub down with a cloth, maybe sprinkle yourself with powdered starch or talc, and call it a day. Soap was expensive and not always trusted. We'll get to that. So a brisk toweling off was often the best you could do. It wasn't about being clean. It was about not being too dirty. And if you were especially unlucky, well, some households reused gray water from laundry day for bathing. Yes, your bath was literally someone else's sock soup. It's worth noting that even Queen Victoria herself wasn't known for indulging in frequent baths. While her palaces had the means, the monarch reportedly favored sponge baths and was famously resistant to change. Her doctor once wrote that bathing too often would weaken the nerves. That's right, cleanliness was considered slightly dangerous. How refreshing. So, as you dry yourself off with a towel that's been used by 3 other people, consider how far we've come. Or don't. Because the next time you complain about your lukewarm shower, just remember, at least you're not elbow deep in your uncle's bathwater. Now that you're towel drying your semi-clean limbs and trying not to think too hard about the dubious color of the water, let's talk about soap. Glorious, fragrant, squeaky clean soap. Except in Victorian England, it was often anything but that. Soap in this era sits at the curious crossroads of necessity and luxury. To the modern eye, it seems like a basic household item. To the average Victorian, though, it was something to be used sparingly, hoarded, or even faked. Yes, faked, because not all soap was created equal. Some was barely soap at all. The earliest Victorians relied on hard grayish soap made from rendered animal fat and lye. It was effective in the sense that it removed dirt, but it also left your skin feeling like dried parchment and often carried the faint aroma of boiled pig. Delightful. But soap was taxed until 1853, making it a costly indulgence for many. You didn't waste it on frivolous things like everyday hand washing. You saved it for laundry, for Sunday sponge downs, and for special occasions like visits from the in-laws or the local vicar. The wealthy, of course, had access to finer products, milled soaps imported from France, scented with lavender rosewater, or the ever-popular almond milk, which rarely contained any almonds. These were displayed in bathrooms as a mark of sophistication, not necessarily used. Having expensive soap was almost more important than using expensive soap. Appearances were everything. Enterprising soap makers began advertising their wares with wild claims. One brand promised to restore a woman's natural bloom. Another hinted it could ward off disease because cleanliness was increasingly tied to morality. If you were dirty, the implication was you were also lazy, sinful, or worse, poor. Still, the average person didn't buy it. Literally. They often made their own if they had the time and patience. Homemade soap was a messy business involving cauldrons, barrelfuls of ash, and animal tallow. The results were harsh, caustic, and about as perfumed as a chimney sweep's socks. Historians still argue whether Victorian soap culture was truly about hygiene or just another form of social signaling. What's clear is that branding mattered. You weren't just buying a cleaning product, you were buying a moral identity. And the ads, oh, they were masterpieces of absurdity. Soap was said to be pure enough for royalty, gentle as a mother's kiss, or the choice of all refined ladies and gentlemen. Never mind that using it more than twice a week might leave your skin raw and cracking. There's even a curious trend among some households hiding the good soap when guests came over. Why? So they wouldn't use it. This led to the birth of the decorative soap, ornate scented shaped like fruit or seashells meant to be seen not touched. It still exists today, lingering in your aunt's guest bathroom. Of course, not everyone could afford even the cheapest store-bought bars, for the very poor washing might involve sand ashes or nothing at all. In factories, workers used gritty industrial soap that doubled as degreaser. It stripped everything, including skin oil dignity and sometimes fingerprints. And yet, there was hope. In the mid to late Victorian period, a few visionaries began to democratize cleanliness. William Lever, later of Lever Brothers, think Unilever launched Sunlight Soap, a product aimed at ordinary people. Affordable, nicely scented, and aggressively advertised, it became a household name. He even built an entire model village, Port Sunlight, for his workers, centered on the idea that cleanliness bred respectability. Still daily, washing with soap was not yet the norm. Most people used it judiciously, scrubbing only where the nose might notice. Armpits, hands, face. The rest, well covered in layers of clothing, it could wait. Soap also found its way into unexpected places. Some people, believing it had purifying powers, placed it under pillows to cure nightmares or in drawers to repel moths. One fringe medical theory suggested ingesting lye-based soap might cleanse the body from the inside. Spoiler, it did not. It mostly caused violent regret. So, here you are now, cradling a small, rapidly dissolving bar of homemade soap, wondering whether it's doing more harm than good. Your skin tingles possibly from the lie, possibly from the spiritual thrill of fleeting cleanliness. Just don't drop it. You may never find it again in that bathwater. So your body's cleanish, but what about your teeth? Now that your hands are squeaky or possibly slightly blistered from that lye-heavy bar of soap, let's move on to your mouth. Because no exploration of Victorian hygiene would be complete without a trip into the world of 19th century dental care, a place where plaque fears met bone-handled brushes, soot, and occasionally whiskey. You're in front of a chipped mirror now, peering at a mouthful of Victorian teeth. Let's just say the dental standard back then didn't include pearly whites or minty freshness. It was more like, are they still in your head? Good enough. Toothbrushes existed, though, not in the convenient plastic form you're used to. Most were made with bone or wood handles and bristles harvested from pigs or badgers. You pick one up, examine its rigid, uneven bristles, and suppress a gag. It smells faintly of old soap, possibly clove, and definitely regret. If you were rich, it might have come in a velvet-lined case. If you were poor, it might have been communal. Yes, shared. Let that settle in. And then there's the toothpaste, or rather tooth powder. You wouldn't squeeze a tube. You dip your terrifying bristles into a jar of fine, often chalky dust. Ingredients included crushed charcoal baking soda, brick dust, and even powdered cuttlefish bone. If you wanted to get fancy, you could add a bit of clove oil or salt. Just don't brush too hard, or you'd scrub off not just plaque, but enamel. Some households skip the brush entirely and rub their teeth with rags often doused in vinegar. Others chewed on twigs, believing the fibrous wood helped clean between teeth. Spoiler, it mostly spread splinters and mouth infections. Historians still argue whether the Victorians truly cared about tooth health or simply tooth appearance. Judging by the number of blackened stumps in old portraits, dental hygiene was often more performance than practice. That's not to say they didn't worry about their teeth at all. Oh no, they obsessed about bad breath. Halitosis was a social killer. Remedies ranged from chewing parsley and cloves to rinsing with wine or alarmingly ammonia. There's even record of some folks gargling with gunpowder tea. To be fair, if you gargled with ammonia, no one would dare get close enough to smell your breath anyway. Dental visits, meanwhile, were terrifying affairs. Anesthetic was rare and unreliable. If you had a cavity, or worse, an exposed nerve, your choices were limited: suffer or have the offending tooth yanked out with a set of cold metal forceps by someone called a tooth drawer. Sometimes they weren't even medical professionals. Barbers, blacksmiths, and traveling quacks all offered extractions. Some even did it in public squares, complete with music to drown out the screaming. Let's say you've got the shillings and the courage to sit in one of London's newer dental parlors. You lower yourself into the stiff back chair gripping the armrests. The dentist looms with a rusty pick and a monocle muttering about gum rot and toothworms. Yes, many Victorians genuinely believed cavities were caused by tiny creatures gnawing inside the enamel. It wasn't entirely their fault; germ theory was still catching on. To replace a lost tooth, you could opt for a wooden prosthetic, or if you were particularly unlucky, one made from another person's teeth, often stolen from corpses or sold by the desperately poor. These so-called Waterloo teeth were a booming trade after major battles. If you were fashionable, your smile might literally belong to a dead French soldier, très chic. And then there were the potions. Bottled tooth tinctures promised everything from cavity prevention to spiritual purification. One popular brand contained alcohol, peppermint, and crushed coral. Another had opium, because nothing says fresh breath like gentle narcotics. Eventually, reformers and medical writers began advocating for real dental hygiene. Pamphlets appeared urging twice daily brushing, but uptake was slow. Many still relied on natural remedies or simply hoped for the best. Oral hygiene was often passed down in families, meaning if grandma brushed with ashes, so did you. So, here you stand, toothbrush in one hand, a tin of Dr. Balthazar's gum powder in the other. You brace yourself, brush your teeth with the enthusiasm of someone entering battle, and try not to wince at the taste. It's somewhere between baking soda and despair. You rinse with tepid water from the shared basin. Spit. Look in the mirror again. Congratulations, you've survived a Victorian brushing. Just don't smile too wide. You might scare the neighbors. Ready for the final boss of Victorian hygiene. You've made it through the soap and the soot, the bristles and the bone dust. Now comes one of the most precarious acts in the entire ballet of Victorian hygiene: relieving yourself. Picture this. You're up in that cramped top floor flat again. It's the middle of the night. You've had a questionable bowl of stew and half a pint of cheap gin and now your digestive system is issuing a formal complaint. But here's the problem. There's no bathroom, no plumbing, no soft glow nightlight guiding your way. What you do have is a chamber pot, possibly floral patterned, possibly cracked, and a strong sense of hope. Victorian nighttime bathroom habits were a choreography of creaks, hushes, and finely honed balance. The chamber pot, or gezunder because it goes under the bed, is your savior. You slide it out quietly. You don't want to wake the baby, or the in-laws, or the mouse that's taken up residence behind the wainscot. You squat, you aim, you hope gravity does its job. If you're lucky, there's water or lye already in the pot to reduce odor. If not, well, you work fast. The morning after the real fun begins. Someone, probably the youngest daughter or a hired girl, if the family is fortunate, must carry that pot along with its brimming friends out into the shared courtyard or alley and empty it into the nearest night soil cart. This job is exactly as awful as it sounds. The carts, pulled by resigned-looking horses, make their morning rounds through every street, collecting human waste and carting it off to be dumped somewhere. Ideally far away, realistically, the river. Historians still argue how consistently waste was disposed of in accordance with new sanitation laws, because those laws existed, but enforcement was sporadic at best. In some cities, night soil ended up fertilizing local fields. In others, it simply seeped into the nearest ditch. If you didn't have a chamber pot, or if yours was full, a real possibility in a house of 8, you might rely on a communal privy, usually a wooden shack out back, with a seat over a pit. These were rarely cleaned and almost never private. In winter, the seat was cold enough to shock the soul from your body. In summer, it was a buzzing Eden for flies. In more urban neighborhoods, where backyards didn't exist, you might find a shared toilet behind a row of houses. Locked with a key passed around the tenants, it was often blocked foul or both. One account from the time simply calls it the door of dread. Enough said, and for the unlucky poor. The street sufficed. It was not uncommon to find alley corners with telltale puddles and piles. This led to the rise of public urinals, urine troughs, and cast iron pissoirs designed to curb the constant flooding of sidewalks. Women, however, were mostly left out of this urination infrastructure. Modesty prevented it, so many simply held it for hours, all day even. Victorian bladders were truly heroic. Then there's the matter of toilet paper, or lack thereof. Most used torn-up newspaper catalog pages, or whatever scrap fabric was available. The truly refined might use squares of moss or wool if it was a festive occasion. The Sears catalog later became a prized possession, not for its products, but for its perforated pages. Flush toilets did exist, sort of. Inventors, like Thomas Crapper, yes, really were beginning to refine indoor plumbing, but early designs were finicky, expensive, and prone to erupting like geysers. For the vast majority, a good, reliable pit latrine beat a misfiring flush system any day. Some of the upper crust had water closets installed, but even they didn't always connect to a sewer. Instead, they led to a cesspool beneath the house. These needed regular emptying, a process that involved a man climbing down inside with a bucket and a rope. This person was called a gong farmer. You didn't envy the gong farmer, You didn't even make eye contact with the gong farmer. It's worth noting that odors weren't just tolerated, they were often masked with heavy perfumes or ignored altogether. Households burned incense or boiled vinegar to refresh the air. Some even kept bowls of camphor near the chamber pot to take the edge off. And if you were traveling, good luck. Train stations had primitive loos, but you'd often have to pay a penny to use them. Hence the phrase, to spend a penny. You clutch your coin and pray the facilities are open functioning and relatively dry. So now, back in that narrow flat, you replace the chamber pot beneath your bed. You tuck yourself under heavy unwashed quilts and whisper a prayer that no one else in the room has to go before morning. Because if they do, you're sleeping next to the pot that's now half full and slightly sloshing. Think fashion was fabulous in the 1800s. Try sweating through 6 layers of wool. You wake up still tucked under your layers of wool and dust-heavy bedding. The air is cool, but stale thick with the musk of bodies' old wood and faint coal smoke. As you stretch and shift under the blankets, something itches your skin, your scalp, your general dignity. You sit up and feel it instantly, the itch of yesterday's grime caught beneath too many layers of clothing. And none are more intrusive than the notorious corset. Victorian fashion didn't just trap your torso, it trapped your sweat. Tight-laced corsets, chemises, petticoats, and full skirts ensured that your body was swaddled in enough fabric to absorb every drop of perspiration. And then keep it snugly against your skin for hours, sometimes days. In a world where daily bathing was rare, underclothes bore the brunt of your body's rebellion. You slip out of your nightgown, or maybe you slept in your daywear, who's checking and begin the tedious ritual of dressing. First the chemise, then drawers if you wore them, followed by corset petticoat, bodice skirt, overskirt, maybe a bustle. And don't forget the stockings, gloves, and sometimes even sleeve linings. By the time you're dressed, you've broken a sweat just from the effort. But taking it all off again, just to sponge your underarms, not happening. So, instead, you reach for a rag, doused with vinegar or rose water, and give your pits a discreet dab. Maybe you sprinkle some toilet powder, a mix of starch and floral scent down your bodice. It won't solve the problem, but it'll delay detection. Historians still argue how hygienic corset wear actually was. Some claim the tightness impeded circulation, caused fainting, or warped internal organs. Others say the real issue was heat and sweat trapped beneath multiple layers with no chance to evaporate. Either way, corsets weren't just restrictive, they were sweaty little ovens. Men didn't escape this fabric prison either. Waistcoats, high collars, starched shirts, wool trousers, cravats. You could spot a working-class man by the salt marks on his hatband, the dried signature of a laborer's sweat permanently etched into felt. And laundry. That's for another day and another family member. Most people didn't own enough undergarments to rotate clean ones daily. You wore the same chemise or shirt for several days, maybe a week, maybe more. If it looked fine and didn't smell too strongly of regret, it was clean enough. So, you develop coping mechanisms. Linen was prized for being breathable and easier to wash. You might stuff dried herbs, lavender, mint, even rosemary, into little sachets and tuck them into your waistband. They don't stop the sweat, but they distract from it. Barely. and heaven help you if you had to exercise in that getup. Women were advised not to overexert. Dainty perspiration was acceptable, but visible sweat, positively indecent. Ladies were encouraged to glow, not glisten, and certainly never drip. So walks were slow, parasols were common, and fans were essential, not just for flair, but for fending off the telltale forehead shine of exertion. And speaking of shame, there was no deodorant, at least not in the way you know it. Victorians had no aluminum-based antiperspirants. They used alum powder, baking soda, or floral salves with questionable effectiveness. One popular DIY recipe included crushed cucumbers and milk, which sounds more like a salad than a hygiene product. Then there were the bloomers, yes, those scandalous pants that early feminists wore under skirts to promote hygiene and ease of movement. They were mocked endlessly, partly because they hinted that women might gasp, move more freely. But reform dress, including lighter layers and looser bodices, slowly gained traction as the century turned. Still, for most of the 1800s, fashion and hygiene were bitter enemies. Your sweat pooled beneath boning and velvet. Your scalp itched under feathered hats. Your collar chafed with every step. But style came first. In wealthier homes, changing your underthings more often was a sign of status. Some even had servants whose job it was to powder your back and relace your corset each morning. Others used perfumed oils to tame the smell of unwashed fabric. But even the rich couldn't escape one truth: if you wear 6 layers in summer, you will sweat like a butcher in a greenhouse. And so, you get used to it. You become a little nose blind to your own bouquet. You move slower. Sit in shaded spots. Fan yourself furiously, and pray the person next to you hasn't eaten onions or forgotten their rose water. But you also know deep down that no amount of lace lavender or starch can truly defeat the steamy, unrelenting truth corsets and sweat are a package deal. You've spent the morning glistening beneath 3 layers of dampened linen, and you're beginning to wonder, is there anywhere you can get a proper wash without boiling an entire kettle's worth of water first? The answer? If you're lucky, and in the right part of town, lies down the street at a curious new establishment, the public bathhouse. But let's not romanticize it too quickly. These weren't glamorous Roman spas with marble pillars and scented oils. No, Victorian bathhouses were plain functional and often met with suspicion. You arrive at one maybe near Whitechapel or Birmingham's outer wards, a red brick building with peeling paint and a stiff wooden sign reading Public Baths and Wash House. You push open the door and are immediately hit by the scent of damp plaster soap and vague embarrassment. The bathhouse is separated into sections by gender and entry costs a penny or two. Inside, you're handed a towel that feels like sandpaper and shown to a stall with a shallow tub, a wooden bench, and a bucket. The attendant tells you how many scoops of hot water you're allowed. Use them wisely. For many, this is their only opportunity to truly soak away from cramped quarters, away from shared pots and reused rags. The experience is less about luxury and more about reclaiming a sense of dignity. Still, there's no guarantee of privacy. Thin walls, communal changing rooms, and the occasional knock from the attendant reminding you your time is up. Keep things brisk. Historians still argue whether public bathhouses were embraced or simply endured. Reformers promoted them as bastions of public morality, cleanliness as virtue. But among the working class, there was often an undercurrent of shame. Using the bathhouse could signal to others that you didn't have the means to wash at home. Worse rumors swirled that bathhouses were hotbeds for loose behavior. No evidence, just the usual Victorian fear of anything involving bare skin and warm water. If you were middle class or upwardly mobile, you might use a private bath at home if your plumbing allowed. But the truly posh had entire bathrooms constructed complete with copper tubs and gas-heated water tanks. These were temples of hygiene and vanity, often decorated with tiles and featuring shelves of perfumed soaps and elegant brushes. Still, even these were used sparingly. Full baths might be a weekly affair, perhaps bi-weekly in colder months. Public bathhouses, despite their awkward reputation, gradually expanded across cities. London alone saw dozens spring up by the 1870s, some with attached laundries offering working families a one-stop spot for bodily and garment hygiene. These laundries were loud, steamy affairs filled with clanging buckets and the smell of lye soap. You might see women elbow-deep in boiling tubs, scrubbing collars and cuffs with military precision. As you soak in your rationed bathwater, careful not to splash too much, you listen to the muffled sounds of others washing nearby. A baby's giggle, the squeak of a bar of soap on porcelain, someone humming an off-key tune. It's oddly soothing, this shared vulnerability. Everyone here is chasing the same fleeting reward, the sensation of being briefly completely clean. Of course, the water isn't always pristine. Some bathhouses reused tubs with only a quick rinse between patrons. One pamphlet warned that a poor man might bathe in the disease of the man before him, but such complaints rarely deterred the desperate. If your only other option was washing in a freezing outdoor basin, or skipping altogether even questionable cleanliness was a luxury, you finish your bath, the towel scrapes your skin dry, and you redress still slightly damp and smelling faintly of lavender soap and damp wool. You nod at the attendant on your way out and step into the busy street feeling somehow lighter, even as the soot and stink of London begin their slow reclamation. Eventually, public bathhouses became municipal priorities, with city councils allocating funds for new construction. Reformers published glowing reports linking cleanliness to reduced disease, reduced crime, and increased productivity. For once, the science and the sentiment aligned. A clean citizen, it turned out, was a more compliant one. But in the early days, when everything still smelled like yesterday's stew and tomorrow's regret, bathhouses weren't miracles. They were compromises. Awkward, steamy, slightly humiliating compromises. And yet, as you walk home with damp hair and a faint itch from the soap you admitted, you feel better. Maybe even proud. You are for one brief moment a freshly scrubbed Victorian in a world that rarely lets anyone stay clean for long. You're clean, relatively speaking. But as you wander the damp cobblestone streets, inhaling that familiar blend of horse sweat, coal smoke, and wet wool, a lingering question creeps in. If bathing is such a hassle, why not wash more often? The answer lies in one of the strangest and most persistent ideas of the 19th century, the miasma theory. The belief that foul smells, literally bad air, were the root of disease. Not germs, not bacteria, just stench. Victorians were terrified of bad airs. They believed that illness floated invisibly through foul-smelling places, graveyards, alleyways, marshes, and even unwashed bodies, which meant paradoxically that touching water, especially cold water, could actually weaken you, making you more susceptible to illness. You step into a modest parlor where the windows are shut tight, the curtains drawn, and the air thick with rose-scented vinegar simmering on a brazier. Why? Because the family believes it will keep the miasma out. You fan yourself, trying not to choke on the cloying aroma, and marvel at how much effort is spent not on cleanliness itself, but on masking and avoiding stink. Bathing, especially in cold water, was seen as risky. It opened the pores, you see, allowing dangerous vapors to sneak into the bloodstream. Doctors sometimes advised patients to limit washing during epidemics, fearing that a sudden chill might allow cholera to seep in with the draft. Even changing your clothes too often was deemed suspicious behavior, possibly inviting illness by shocking the body's natural defenses. Historians still argue how sincerely the average person believed in miasmas. Some used the theory to justify their aversion to washing. Others were genuinely frightened of invisible danger. In any case, the cultural impact was massive. It shaped everything from architecture to public policy. Take the design of city streets. Some urban planners widened roads and added parks not just for aesthetic reasons, but to allow fresh air to circulate. Trees weren't just pretty, they were disease fighters. A stroll through the park wasn't about leisure, it was about dodging death. And in the home, you might find a curious little object called a pomander, a small orb filled with herbs worn around the neck or placed near the bed. It was meant to purify the air, to fight back the invisible rot. Some households kept sponges soaked in vinegar hanging near windows. Others painted their walls with lime wash, believing it would seal in foul vapors. Public health campaigns, too, fixated on smell. The infamous Great Stink of 1858, a hot summer when the Thames turned into a literal sewer, finally forced Parliament to act, not because people were dying, but because they couldn't stand the smell anymore. Laws were passed, sewers were expanded, and slowly the tide began to turn. But fear dies slowly. For decades after, people still boiled vinegar to cleanse the air, stuffed handkerchiefs with lavender, and whispered about the dangers of washing during illness. It wasn't until germ theory gained traction in the late 19th century, thanks to figures like Pasteur and Lister, that the tide truly turned. Still, for most Victorians, hygiene remained a strange balance of ritual suspicion and habit. You might wipe your hands with carbolic-scented towels, but avoid washing your feet. You might trust that a good airing of your clothes would suffice, but avoid scrubbing your hair for fear of brain chills. And let's not forget the change of air prescription, a popular cure for everything from melancholy to tuberculosis. Sickly individuals were sent to the seaside or countryside not for fresh water or good food, but for better-smelling breezes. Entire resorts flourished on this principle. Breathing clean air, it was believed, could literally cleanse your soul. So here you are, pausing on a London street corner as a breeze cuts through the alley. You instinctively hold your handkerchief to your nose, embroidered, scented, and slightly ridiculous. and hope it's enough to ward off whatever invisible danger lingers in the fog. You're not just fighting grime anymore, you're battling the very air itself. It's summer 1858. The sun hangs heavy over London, and the Thames glistens with oily shimmer. At first glance, it looks almost picturesque until the smell hits you. Thick, oppressive, and inescapable. People retch as they pass bridges. Families flee riverside homes. Even Parliament can't ignore it anymore. This is not an urban legend. This is the Great Stink. You're walking along the embankment, handkerchief pressed firmly to your face, but it's no use. The stench seeps through everything. The river has become a flowing sewer, literally. Decades of industrial runoff, household waste, and night soil dumped into its waters have finally boiled in the heat into a reeking fog that blankets the city. Members of Parliament wrap their windows with soaked curtains and sheets to survive their sessions. Some even dangle vinegar-soaked sponges from their noses. It doesn't help. Debates falter, noses crinkle, and for the first time in history, government is brought to a standstill by a smell. Historians still argue whether the Great Stink was truly the turning point for modern sanitation, but it certainly kicked people into action. Joseph Bazalgette, a civil engineer with a penchant for grand projects, is brought in to design a new sewer system. His solution: massive underground channels stretching for miles beneath the city, lined with brick and gravity fed to carry waste far away from the city. Before this, London relied on cesspits, holes dug beneath houses and emptied sporadically. These often leaked into the surrounding soil, contaminating wells and drinking water. The link between water and disease was still being debated, but cholera outbreaks were becoming harder to ignore. The smell might have offended the elite sensibilities, but the illness struck fear in every class. Bazalgette's plan was monumental. Over 1,300 miles of sewers intercepting old flows and rerouting them downstream. His design was so forward-thinking that many of the tunnels are still in use today. He overbuilt, arguing that if the population grew beyond expectations, they'd be grateful he'd planned ahead, and indeed they were. But let's not get too romantic. The Great Stink was, after all, an olfactory nightmare. Fish floated belly up in the river. Pubs along the banks closed their windows permanently. Some factories sent workers home, unable to operate under such conditions. Imagine every drain in the city emptying into a single river, now baked by the summer sun. And while this event finally forced the city's hand, not all Victorians were convinced by the new sanitation movement. Some believed the smell had been exaggerated. Others clung to miasma theory, thinking that building more sewers would just spread the foulness underground. One newspaper even proposed floating gardens on the river to refresh the air. Lovely, but wildly insufficient. In the meantime, people found creative ways to cope. Scented candles were sold as miasma guards. Stores marketed colognes named after alpine breezes and sea foam. One enterprising vendor sold packets of fresh country hay to wave under one's nose while commuting. Another claimed his lemon balm nasal oil could banish the Thames from one's thoughts. There were fringe theories too. One pamphlet blamed the stench on spiritual decay, urging Londoners to repent. Another suggested feeding pigs a more varied diet to reduce the odor of their waste before it entered the water supply. Science was not always the loudest voice in the room, but progress marched on. Construction began slow but steady, with streets torn up and new pipes laid. Workers toiled in ankle-deep sludge, braving cave-ins, gas buildups, and the occasional surprise corpse. It was dirty, thankless work, but the result was one of the most ambitious urban engineering feats of the century. You standing at the river's edge, in your crumpled linen trousers and sweat-damp blouse, watch a barge drift by. Its wake leaves a rainbow sheen on the water, an oily signature of industrial runoff. You dab your forehead and decide maybe it's time to walk the long way home. Because on this day and in this city, the most powerful force isn't royalty or empire. It's the simple, undeniable tyranny of stink. After escaping the tyranny of the Thames, you return home to face a fresh ordeal laundry day. Or more accurately, laundry days, because in Victorian England, getting your clothes clean isn't just a chore. It's an entire production. You're in the back courtyard now, surrounded by wrinkled aprons and a pile of socks that could probably walk away on their own. The first step is hauling water. Buckets upon buckets from the communal pump, or if you're lucky, from an indoor tap that only works on weekdays and has a vendetta against consistent pressure. The copper boiler is already belching steam, and you're elbow deep in a tub of linen scrubbing with what looks suspiciously like a cheese grater, but is actually a washboard. The soap smells sharp, almost metallic, a homemade concoction of lye soda and animal fat. It doesn't just sting your nostrils, it stings everything. You rub, rinse, wring, repeat. Each motion is a full body effort, and every stitch of fabric must be lifted, twisted, and pounded like it owes you money. Shirts are slapped against stones or boards. Stockings are beaten with sticks. Petticoats receive the special insult of being boiled in lye water, a bubbling brew so caustic it eats the skin from your knuckles if you're not careful. Historians still debate whether Victorian laundry methods were more effective or just more exhausting. But one thing's clear, it wasn't a task, it was a full-body sport. Women spent entire days laboring over clothing, often starting before dawn and collapsing at dusk. And that's just washing. Drying is another matter. If it's a rare, sunny day, you string lines between walls or trees and pin everything with wooden pegs. But in winter, forget it. Clothes are draped over chairs, hung on banisters, or laid flat near the hearth, where they steam and hiss and fill the home with the pungent scent of half-clean wool. Ironing, too, is no simple matter. The iron itself weighs about as much as a newborn calf and must be heated on the stove. There's no temperature dial, just guesswork and burns. You sprinkle water onto shirts with your fingertips and pray the iron doesn't scorch anything important. Scorch marks are a badge of honor in most households, a sign that you at least tried. And of course, there's no escaping the soap. It dries your skin, cracks your nails, and makes your hands smell like burnt pork wrapped in baking soda. One popular hack, rubbing goose fat into your palms after washing day to restore moisture. Others used wax or lanolin if they could find it. Even in wealthier homes, laundry was a laborious affair, just outsourced to servants or laundresses. These women hauled, soaked, scrubbed, boiled, dried, and pressed hundreds of garments a week. They carried water up and down narrow staircases, navigated smoky kitchens, and faced constant blisters and back pain. Their hands were permanently wrinkled. their lungs often damaged by years of inhaling lye fumes. By the mid-1800s, wash houses had emerged in larger cities, offering access to shared facilities, and if you were lucky, a wringer, an early machine that squeezed water from clothes between two rollers. Revolutionary, if you could afford the penny fee. And yet for all the sweat and steam, cleanliness remained elusive. Rain could undo an entire day's work. Chimney soot drifted through windows, leaving smudges on still damp sleeves. Children played in the street and returned caked in mud. Husbands spilled gravy at dinner. The cycle never ended. You're finally finished. Shirts hang like surrender flags. Sheets sway in the wind, dripping slowly. Your back aches. Your fingers are prunes. And the soap's bitter. Taste lingers on your tongue because you absent-mindedly licked your lips somewhere between the second rinse and the wringer. There's no celebration, no rest. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing the family will look slightly less bedraggled tomorrow. And the knowledge that in 7 days, or 3, if your toddler finds a puddle, it all begins again. So you sit on the stoop with your cracked hands and your damp sleeves watching the steam rise from your wash basin like a ghost slipping off to haunt someone else's laundry pile. You've survived Victorian Laundry Day. Barely. You survived the laundry, but now your scalp itches. Again. That's because in the grand circus of Victorian hygiene, one ring is always full of tangled, greasy, suspiciously active hair. You sit before a cloudy mirror, brushing methodically. The brush with its boar bristle rose and carved wooden handle has seen better days and possibly other owners. You try not to think about it. Hygiene is aspirational here, and hair is no exception. Victorian hair care was less about cleanliness and more about management. For most women, washing the hair with water and soap happened only every few weeks, sometimes months. Why? Because it was a hassle. Heating enough water, drying thick tresses without electricity, and avoiding the dreaded head chill was no small feat. Plus, remember the miasma theory, wet hair was thought to invite illness straight through your skull. Instead of washing, you brushed. A lot. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of strokes each night. It wasn't just about style. It was believed to distribute the scalp's natural oils, keeping the hair healthy. In practice, it mostly smeared grease from root to tip and trapped dust in a beautiful glossy coating. You might also sprinkle your hair with powder rice starch or orris root to absorb excess oil. Or rub in bay rum, rosemary vinegar, or a homemade mix of egg yolk and gin. If you were feeling fancy, you'd twist in a drop of lavender oil and pretend that made everything clean. Historians still argue whether this routine was effective or just elaborate self-deception. Some trichologists, hair specialists of the day, wrote solemn treatises on the dangers of overwashing, warning that it would disturb the scalp's natural balance. Others insisted the real danger lay in lice, those ever-present, ever-unwelcome companions. Yes, lice. Nits were a near-universal experience, especially for children. Remedies included combing with hot vinegar, dusting the scalp with mercuric powder, very toxic, but hey, or shaving it all off and starting fresh. Some families kept a knit comb hanging by the hearth, a small, fine-toothed device that resembled a torture instrument and often lived up to its reputation. And it wasn't just women. Men, too, dealt with hair hygiene in curious ways. pomade was king, a mixture of bear fat beeswax or petroleum jelly scented with lemon or rose. It kept hair slicked back and vaguely presentable, though it often attracted dust, soot, and small insects. Barbershops offered weekly pomade reapplications and the occasional wash, but most men stuck to brushing, combing, and praying. Hair loss, also a worry. Countless tonics promised to restore thinning hair or reverse baldness. These concoctions often included things like ammonia, cayenne, pepper, turpentine, and lead. If they didn't make your hair grow, they at least made your scalp feel something. On fire, usually. And then there's the styling. Women's hair was an elaborate architectural feat. Braids, buns, ringlets, sometimes augmented with rats. No, not literal rodents, but padded shapes made from your own shed hair to boost volume. False hair pieces were also common and widely accepted, provided they matched your natural color and didn't fall off mid-curtsy. Wigs, once a fashion staple, had largely fallen out of favor, except among older gentlemen or professionals. But hair pieces endured. One popular trick involved weaving your hair into a net at night and removing it carefully each morning to preserve curls. Another, sleeping in metal curlers that left your scalp as tender as your pride. Water, as usual, was approached with caution. Rain could undo hours of styling. Humidity was the enemy of ringlets, and bathwater rarely touched the scalp unless things had gotten truly dire. When a full wash did occur, it was usually done over a basin with someone else pouring water slowly while you leaned back in a chair like a trust exercise gone wrong. Even children weren't spared the hair care hassle. Mothers soaked combs in oil and yanked them through snarls while offering soothing advice like, "Hold still, or it'll hurt more." And it always hurt more. Eventually, toward the end of the century, shampoos began appearing, still primitive, often caustic, and sold in glass bottles with names like Mrs. Allen's Hair Reviver or Euphoric Wash for scalp and soul. They foamed erratically and left hair squeaky in the worst way. Still, it was a start. You, now seated at your washstand, feel slightly betrayed by your own scalp. It's greasy, but also itchy styled, but also sagging, and definitely harboring at least one tiny uninvited guest. You dab some lavender oil on your temples, brush until your arm aches, and wrap your hair in a cotton scarf. Tomorrow, you tell yourself. Tomorrow, you'll find time to heat the water and scrub it properly. But tonight you sleep with a few hundred strokes of dignity and maybe a powdering of rosemary. Your scalp is powdered. Your brush has done its penance. And now you turn to a final frontier of Victorian cleanliness. How to smell clean without actually being clean. Enter the curious world of Victorian deodorizing. A place of colognes, vinegars, aromatic sachets, and more than a few questionable decisions. You open your small toiletry drawer well box and take stock. There's a tiny bottle of bay rum, a block of alum, a satchel of dried lavender, and a pot labeled odor balm for the modern lady. You don't remember where it came from or what's in it. You don't ask. Because here's the truth. Smelling fresh in the Victorian era didn't mean you were fresh. It meant you had skill access to herbs and a reasonably high tolerance for tingling powders. You begin with a splash of vinegar, rose-scented, if you're lucky, dabbed under each arm with a frayed cloth. It stings a lot, but pain means it's working, maybe. Deodorants as you know them didn't exist yet. Instead, people turned to an astringent mineral powder believed to block odor. It sort of worked in that it left a chalky film and dried out your skin like a week-old pastry. Some women rubbed talc or starch under their arms to absorb sweat. Others used crushed herbs or floral oils, lavender, bergamot, neroli. Men favored stronger colognes, sometimes homemade, that smelled like a cross between pine tar and old library books. You could tell someone's class not by how clean they were, but how convincingly they smelled clean. Historians still argue whether these methods had any real effect or simply masked the truth with clouds of perfume. Some households kept potpourri jars near the front door, not to welcome guests, but to give residents a final sniff check before venturing out. And there were deodorizing innovations: charcoal foot pads for shoes, air freshening brooches with tiny scent reservoirs, even floral corset inserts designed to release perfume slowly throughout the day. They did not account for the fact that corsets also trap sweat like a sponge in a steam room. When things got truly dire, vinegar baths were recommended, not to clean, you mind you, but to cut the odor. One 1850s guide suggests a half pint of white vinegar dashed upon the chest and armpits daily to preserve a wholesome fragrance. A wholesome fragrance, like salad dressing. Some folks turned to colognes, sold in apothecaries. Most were high alcohol, thick with floral or citrus oils. Bay rum was especially popular among men. It had a punchy scent, often mixed with clove or cinnamon, and conveniently masked the smell of cigar smoke, brandy, and regret. If you couldn't afford a bottle, you might try a home remedy. Recipes included everything from lemon peels boiled in spirits to lavender soaked in milk and left on a windowsill for 3 days. Spoiler, the latter smelled exactly as bad as it sounds. Still, cleanliness was increasingly tied to respectability. Smelling bad could cost you a job, social standing, or a marriage prospect. Etiquette manuals instructed ladies on how to refresh themselves discreetly throughout the day, often recommending that they carry a scent cloth in their reticule, a small napkin perfumed with essence of violet or citrus. And then there were the scams, odor neutralizers promising miraculous results made from lard, crushed pearls, and menthol. One popular product was Dr. Blixworth's Dry Bath, a powder that claimed to clean the entire body without water. Its main ingredient, ground rice. You were expected to dust yourself like a pastry and go on your way. Of course, none of this worked particularly well in July. During heat waves, even the fanciest perfumed households began to smell like livestock. Servants in particular had to battle sweat with limited resources. Some were allowed lemon water for wiping down, others just had to work fast and hope for a breeze. There were moments of genius, though. One trend involved sewing dried flower petals into clothing hems, a kind of floral perimeter defense. Others kept bowls of crushed camphor under their beds to purify their personal scent aura. And of course, people carried handkerchiefs like medieval gas masks, always at the ready. So here you are, powdered, dabbed, and spritzed with what you hope is bay rum and not boot polish. You pat your armpits dry with a puff of starch, fluff your chemise, and give yourself a final sniff. You still smell vaguely of vinegar and fatigue, but in Victorian terms, that's practically ethereal. But here's the real dirt. Cleanliness wasn't just about hygiene, it was about class. You're smelling passable now. If a bit like a spiced pickle, and you step back into the daily rhythm of life only to be reminded that in Victorian England, cleanliness isn't just personal. It's political. It's economic. It's a sharp line drawn right between the haves, the have-nots, and the have-servants. Because when it came to hygiene, social class dictated everything. How often you bathed, what soap you used, whether your water came from a faucet or a filthy bucket, and who cleaned up after you. You enter a middle-class townhouse. Polished wood, faint smells of tea and coal. Upstairs, a woman lounges in a robe, preparing for her morning sponge bath. But she doesn't fetch the water herself. That's what the maid is for, and not just any maid. There's the scullery maid for the kitchen grime, the laundress for the linens, and perhaps a lady's maid to wash powder and perfume a lady's armpits into respectability. Downstairs, in the cramped servants' quarters, it's a different world. A copper pot for boiling water. A chipped enamel basin for sponge baths. You wash when you can, how you can. Maybe a quick rag to the face before running breakfast upstairs. You smell of work, and no one expects otherwise. Historians still argue how deeply this hygiene divide influenced health outcomes between the classes. Certainly, wealthier Victorians had better access to soap and clean linens. But their servants were often cleaner in practice, despite fewer resources, because they were constantly scrubbing, laundering, and polishing. Just not themselves. For the working poor, the divide was starker still. Imagine a woman in a tenement trying to keep her family respectable. She mends torn stockings and boils underthings in a borrowed pot. She combs her daughter's hair with fingers when the NIT comb breaks. She might skip her own bath for weeks just to afford laundry soap. The invisible labor of cleanliness never stops, and it's rarely rewarded. Respectability in the Victorian world is tied directly to how clean you look, even if you're not clean. There's no tolerance for a dirty collar in public. Shoes must be shined, even if your socks are falling apart. A lady's hem must be spotless, though her petticoats may be stiff with old lye. The illusion is everything. And nowhere is this more evident than in the burgeoning profession of domestic service. Maids and footmen are expected to maintain pristine appearances while working in filth. The laundry maid, elbow deep in boiling underwear, must herself appear crisp and fresh when summoned upstairs. The cook, drenched in steam and gravy, still wears a starched cap and apron. Hygiene is both weapon and uniform. Smell, too, becomes class-coded. The poor reek of coal dust, sweat, and boiled cabbage. The middle class aim for rosewater and beeswax. The elite a mix of French cologne and utter detachment. To smell of nothing is a luxury. To smell of labor is a stigma. Some employers go so far as to inspect their servants' bodies, hands' hairbreadth. One lady famously dismissed her housemaid for having odorous fingers. Others deducted wages if a servant's appearance embarrassed them publicly. Cleanliness is a contract, and servants bear the cost. In wealthier homes, bathing becomes a display of refinement. Some families install full bathrooms, not because they use them daily, but because it proves they could. There are even social rules about when to bathe. Early evening before dinner. Never first thing in the morning, that's for rougher sorts. Meanwhile, public bathhouses become lifelines for those without options. Yet using them is stigmatized. It marks you as someone without means, someone who must share your ablutions with strangers. Some people go miles out of their way just to avoid being seen entering one. Children grow up learning these unspoken rules. Brush your teeth with baking soda if you want to seem middle class. Wash your face every morning, even if the rest of you goes untouched. Keep a clean handkerchief no matter what. Appearances may not make you respectable, but filth will certainly deny it. You walk down a street, now passing women with parasols and men in top hats. The richer ones glide past untouched by soot. Their clothes are brushed, their shoes shined, their scents imported. But they're no cleaner underneath it all, just better insulated from the muck. You stop, adjust your collar, and realize something true in Victorian society. Cleanliness isn't just next to godliness, it's a disguise, a performance. And not everyone gets the same stage. You've learned to perform cleanliness with starch and scent. You've witnessed the rituals of the privileged and the toil of the servant class. Now let's pivot ever so delicately into the realm of medicine. Specifically, what happened when you got sick. And the doctor advised a sponge bath. It's 1863 and you're feverish. You're wrapped in 3 layers of wool, sweat-soaked, and mumbling about clock towers. The family doctor arrives, solemn-faced and impressively mustached, and declares your ailment to be a disturbance of the humors, or perhaps a congestion of the bile. His prescription, not medicine, not rest, but a tepid sponge bath. Victorian medical hygiene was a strange stew of emerging science, stubborn tradition, and well-intentioned nonsense. Doctors were beginning to accept germ theory, but many still clung to miasma, bad blood, or spiritual imbalance. A sponge bath, done correctly, was thought to lower fever's balance fluids and purify the body without the dangerous exposure of a full immersion. You lie there, eyes glazed, as a maid wrings out a cloth in lukewarm water, scented faintly with vinegar or spirits of camphor. She dabs your brow, your chest, your limbs. It's more ritual than remedy, a cooling act of care that somehow also makes you feel slightly more human. Historians still argue whether sponge baths were truly effective or just symbolic. They did reduce body temperature. They might have flushed sweat and soot from the skin, but more than anything, they were a form of contact, one of the few hygienic acts that crossed class lines. Even the poor, when sick, might receive a wash from a loved one. Medical belief was murky. Some doctors insisted that the skin breathed and must be kept open to air. Others feared overwashing would strip the body of protective oils. Sponge baths became a compromise, gentle, non-invasive, and unlikely to provoke a cold. And if you weren't being bathed, you were probably drinking something hideous. Doctors routinely prescribed hygiene by ingestion, carbolic acid for indigestion, sulfur water for constipation, milk baths, mercury pills. If it made you sweat, purge, or faint, good news, the treatment was working. Meanwhile, hospitals began catching on to the power of cleanliness thanks to reformers like Florence Nightingale. She didn't know exactly why hygiene mattered, but she knew patients did better when things were clean. Her wards emphasized hand-washing fresh air, and yes, sponge baths. She had nurses scrub everything, patients included, and survival rates improved dramatically. But this was still the exception, not the rule. Many doctors continued treating patients in filthy coats, reusing bloody instruments, and operating in homes where the family dog watched from under the bed. A quick rinse or sponge wipe was about as sterile as it got. For women especially, during childbirth, hygiene was critical and catastrophically neglected. Midwives had their own sponge bath traditions using rose water or warm wine. But male doctors, newly invading the field, often skipped such niceties. Mortality soared until antiseptic methods were slowly introduced, often to scoffs and eye rolls. One doctor famously refused to wash his hands between autopsy and delivery, declaring the practice unmanly. Hundreds of women died from puerperal fever under his care. Eventually, the medical community began to catch up. But change came slowly and sometimes too late. Back in your room, you feel the cloth sweep across your back. The water's gone cool. The fever's broken, for now. A bowl of gray water sits nearby, proof that something's been drawn out, be it sweat toxins or just a bit of yesterday's coal dust. You're still weak, but you're cleaner. And in this world, that's half the battle. The rest lies in surviving your medicine, your doctor, and the ever-present threat of catching something worse in the next room over. And when you finally rise from the sickbed, sorely dehydrated and dressed in linen that feels like sandpaper, you will nod politely when someone asks, "Did you try the sponge bath?" Yes, you did, and you lived. You're back on your feet. A little pale, a little shaky, but upright clean in all the ways a Victorian could hope to be. And as you lace your boots and pin your hair, something curious happens. You hear a flush, not a polite cough or a startled gasp, an actual mechanical flush. It's faint, but unmistakable. You freeze as if you've just heard a ghost clear its throat. Because in 19th century England, that sound signals something astonishing: the rise of the modern toilet. Flushing toilets weren't invented in the Victorian era, but they certainly became possible here thanks to a mix of engineering, public health panic, and one man with a name too perfect to ignore, Thomas Crapper. Let's clear up the myth first. No, Mr. Crapper didn't invent the flush toilet, but he did revolutionize its accessibility. His plumbing company refined the design, making it more reliable, more elegant, and more marketable to an audience that had until recently been perfectly fine with chamber pots and sponge baths. You enter a grander home, now polished mahogany walls, papered in faded peacocks, and step into a newly built water closet. The room is tiled, faintly perfumed, and surprisingly beautiful. A pull chain hangs above a porcelain bowl. You pull. A tank above releases a gush of water, followed by a polite gurgle. It's the future. Historians still argue just how widely flush toilets were adopted in the Victorian period. In upper-class homes, certainly. In public buildings and railway stations, increasingly common. But in tenements and rural cottages, not likely. Most people continued using outhouses or buckets until well into the 20th century. Still, the psychological shift was enormous. A machine that could carry your waste away, out of sight, out of mind, felt like magic. More than that, it felt moral. Cleanliness was next to godliness, and now technology had made it convenient. Meanwhile, entire industries sprang up around sanitation. Joseph Bazalgette's great sewers became the arteries of modern London. The Thames cleared. Cholera outbreaks lessened. People even started to trust indoor plumbing, though early adopters occasionally found their new toilets spirited. Some belched sewer gas. Others exploded, especially when early siphon systems failed. Even Queen Victoria had a water closet installed in her private chambers, sparking a wave of imitative flushes among the aristocracy. Of course, they still kept chamber pots on hand because trust took time. The terminology shifted too. Toilet was still too crude for polite company. You might say lavatory water closet, or WC. In America, restroom and bathroom emerged even when no bathing occurred. Euphemism was the true plumbing of society. At the same time, advertisers leapt into action. Sanitary ware catalogs featured gleaming basins with floral decals and ornate wood paneling. Some even offered matching chamber sets, lavatory pitcher bowl, and towel rail, all designed to coordinate. You weren't just cleaning yourself anymore. You were curating hygiene. There were skeptics, of course. Some believed the noise of a flush could disturb one's digestion. Others feared that indoor toilets might allow sewer demons to enter the home seriously. One article warned of spirits traveling up pipes. So people burned incense, installed traps, and whispered prayers over their plumbing. Still change kept trickling, then gushing through society. Public health campaigns praised flushing toilets as modern marvels. Cities passed laws requiring indoor plumbing in new construction. Schools and factories began building proper restrooms. Slowly, the bucket faded. You, now standing beside a porcelain bowl with gold trim and a slight hiss of mystery, feel a peculiar thrill. Not because it's beautiful, though it is, but because it means you won't have to carry a full chamber pot down the stairs ever again. You flush once more, the gurgle fading into silence. For a fleeting moment, you feel victorious until the carriage door slams shut and you're swept away. Cleanliness may be progress, but as your boots hit gravel again, a new scent rises faintly sour, undeniably human. The next battle has already begun. The carriage drops you off on a gravel path, and before the door even swings open, the scent hits you. It's a combination of damp wool, boiled cabbage, and something slightly sour, an unmistakable signature of too many boys in too small a space with not enough soap. The entry hall is dim lit by a flickering oil lamp. The headmaster's voice drones on in the background as you're handed a thick wool blanket, a cracked chamber pot, and a stern look. You're herded with the other newcomers down a chilly corridor into the dormitory. It's a long room lined with narrow beds, iron-framed and creaking, each mattress thin and horsehair stuffed. You notice immediately that there are no closets, just wooden hooks on the walls, 4 per boy, for coats, hats, trousers, and perhaps optimistically, a spare shirt. Your new bedmate offers a grunt and a name, then gestures at a jug and basin on a rickety side table. "You wash fast in the morning," he mutters, "if the water's not frozen." You try to settle in. The bed sheets are stiff, the pillow lumpy. Above the windows rattle in the wind. From somewhere nearby, a faint snore and a more pungent waft of stale socks. You begin to suspect this place won't be winning any hygiene awards. By Victorian standards, however, This is a model of progress. The rise of boarding schools brought with it a new obsession, shaping cleanliness into both a habit and a moral virtue. At least that was the theory. Your first full day begins with the clang of a brass handbell. It's not yet light out. You and your fellow dorm mates shuffle groggily toward the communal washroom, a drafty chamber where a long row of tin basins await. A single boy is already shivering beside the window, trying to break the ice crust on the water with a stick. You dip your fingers into the basin. It's icy enough to take your breath away. The soap is communal 1 bar, barely a stub. Everyone gets a turn, but few linger long enough to be thorough. One boy has brought a bit of lavender sachet he sneaked from home, clutching it like contraband. The school's idea of hygiene is routine, not results. Every boy is expected to make a show of effort, as the dorm monitor says. Actual cleanliness. Well, that's more of a spectrum. By mid-morning, you've learned the unspoken rules. Don't mention smells unless you're ready for retaliation. Don't leave your chamber pot unemptied. And whatever you do, don't sit on anyone's bed. That's a fast track to dorm-wide scandal. At lunchtime, the dining hall air is thick with boiled turnips and adolescent body odor. You're starting to notice which boys sit slightly apart, which ones are compulsive scratchers, and which seem oddly immune to the cold. The latter have simply adapted. They don't wash, they layer. You make a mental note to try that tomorrow. By evening, it's lights out, except for the dim flicker of oil lamps in the hallway. You hear the scratch of pen on paper, someone writing lines as punishment. Cleanliness is next to godliness, repeated over and over. You think about the jug of now cloudy water beside your bed. You think about home. Victorian reformers believed deeply in the moral power of clean habits. But reality, especially in crowded, underfunded schools, often missed the mark. Historians still argue whether these institutions improved children's health or merely taught them how to appear clean without ever being so. Tonight, in your first boarding school bed, wrapped in a stiff blanket that smells faintly of paraffin and mildew, you breathe shallowly through your mouth and try not to think about the itchy spot on your ankle. The morning routine, if you can call it that, is both frigid and frantic. Long before the sun rises, the dorm bell clatters and groans echo as boys tumble from bed. You lurch up, half-frozen eyes, gritty from poor sleep. There's no lounging, no leisurely stretch under warm covers. Instead, it's a stampede toward the washroom. Every second counts. Once inside, you face a miserable sight, a row of chipped tin basins, already surrounded by shivering forms. Each basin holds a few inches of water, glazed with a delicate layer of ice. Some boys jab at it with the ends of their toothbrushes. Others simply plunge their hands in and flinch, teeth chattering from the cold. Your turn comes. You grip the edges of the basin and dunk your face in. It's like being slapped by a snowball. There's no warming towel afterward, just a grimy rag you hope no one else used. And the towels? There's a designated pile on a rickety shelf in the corner, but they're stiff from overuse and dry, roughly, as well as sandpaper. You choose one at random. Try not to breathe through your nose and pat yourself dry with as little surface contact as possible. There's no hot water unless you're sick and even then, only if the matron thinks you're close to dying. You hear one of the older boys mutter, "Hot waters for corpses and bishops." It's probably true. The toothbrushes are communal in spirit, if not in fact. Each boy technically has one, though some have splintered handles or missing bristles. Paste is a luxury replaced by a tin of powder that smells like burnt chalk and vinegar. It's always open, always half empty, and possibly never cleaned. You dip your brush and tap off the excess and scrub quickly. It feels like sanding your teeth, but that's better than the alternative, which you discover during breakfast. One unfortunate soul who skipped brushing now chews dried mint leaves to cover the scent. He swears it works. It doesn't. Clean clothes aren't part of the morning routine. You wear what you slept in, and what you slept in is usually what you wore yesterday. There's no shame in that it's expected. The unspoken agreement among students is to maintain hygiene illusions. Smooth your shirt, tuck your collar, wipe away the most obvious smudges, but don't dig too deep. You might find something crawling. By mid-morning, the classroom stinks of damp wool and nervous sweat. A teacher opens the window and mutters about miasmas. You don't know what that means yet, but you're pretty sure it's code for you lot reek. Still, some routines endure. Every boy is expected to wash briefly, unenthusiastically, and preferably without complaint. Those who resist may find their boots filled with cold water overnight, or worse, marked as unclean by the dorm monitor. That's social death. Historians still debate whether the emphasis on routine was meant to instill discipline or genuinely believed to promote health. Some argue these schools cared more about orderly appearances than actual hygiene. Others claim that even rudimentary washings lowered infection rates over time. What's certain is that few boys ever felt truly clean, and fewer still dared to say so. On day 2, you're already adapting. You wet your face with minimal splashing. You fake brush your teeth when the powder's missing. You fold your towel and hang it neatly, pretending it's fresh. In truth, you'll get used to the cold. The smell? Not so much. Tonight, as you lie in bed with your damp hair forming icicles on the pillow, you wonder why the windows stay open. To air the place out, someone muttered. But it only lets in more cold. You curl tighter into yourself, already counting down to the moment that basin of frozen water waits for you again. By the end of your first week, you start to grasp the rhythm of clothing life at a Victorian boarding school. And the crown jewel of that rhythm, shirt day. It's not laundry day, mind you. That would imply scrubbing soap and drying lines. Shirt day means it's time to swap the shirt you've been wearing for, well, another shirt. Possibly cleaner, possibly not. It happens on Thursdays. After evening meal and roll call, the housekeeper brings in a wicker basket filled with freshly pressed shirts. They smell vaguely of starch smoke and mildew, better than body odor, worse than anything else. One by one, students are called up by name to take their shirt from the stack. If yours is missing, you get a spare marked only with faint red initials of long graduated boys. You try not to think about them. The shirts themselves are stiff, square-collared linen affairs sewn for durability rather than comfort. Each boy has 2, one on the body, one in reserve. The reserve shirt lives in a wooden drawer for 6 days, absorbing the essence of the dorm until it is gloriously elevated back into rotation. You slip it on, hoping for fewer yellowed patches under the arms. Occasionally you win. And this weekly rotation isn't just about hygiene, it's a character test. Maintaining one's shirt in passable condition for 7 days is seen as virtuous. Frayed cuffs, you're careless, grime at the neck. Slovenly, a mystery stain shaped like whales, definitely suspicious. Cleanliness, or the illusion of it, becomes a silent competition. There are no wardrobes or closets. Clothing is folded with military precision and stacked on open shelves. If you're clever, you hang your shirt by the window where the winter breeze may beat some of the odor out. One boy swears by the press and twist method press it flat under the mattress, then twist it before bed to reset the fibers. It's nonsense, but we all do it anyway. Laundry itself is an institutional ordeal. Full washing happens monthly, yes monthly, when a laundress arrives from town. She collects all garments in sacks that are weighed rather than counted. If the weight is under quota, you get docked sweets. So naturally, boys sometimes soak their socks in the basin before handing them over just to tip the scales. Ingenious, perhaps. Sanitary. Not in the slightest. Your underclothes are your own problem. You quickly learn that airing garments overnight is better than washing them. A well-placed windowsill breeze can work wonders. Historians still argue whether the average boarding student of the 1860s had more faith in the cleansing power of air or the punishing clarity of cold. Either way, full-body washing remains elusive. You spot one boy claimed to have bathed simply by pouring water down his shirt front. It counts. Thursday also brings shirt inspection. A teacher or matron will peer at your collar tug, at your sleeves. Maybe run a gloved hand down your chest. She'll nod if it meets her invisible standard frown if not. There's no real punishment, just shame, which in these walls is currency. The clever boys swap shirts with each other sometimes. Bartering happens when someone has an unexpected visitor, or worse, a scheduled photograph. "I need a cleaner one," they whisper. "I'll trade you half my Sunday pudding." Deals are struck in cloakrooms and corners. It's unspoken, unofficial, and wildly effective. Evenings in the dorm after shirt day have a distinct vibe. Everyone looks marginally brighter. The air smells slightly less stale. For a moment, you imagine you're part of something dignified. Then someone passes gas under the blanket, and the illusion shatters. Still, there's pride in that once-a-week ritual. In a place where soap is sparse and water is hostile, the humble act of rotating one's shirt becomes a declaration: I am managing. I am keeping up. I am clean. Enough. You wake up on Saturday to the faint but unmistakable scent of vinegar and damp wool. It's not laundry day, it's something else. You hear footsteps, quick, determined, unmistakably adult. The smell parade is coming. That's the nickname the boys have given it, though never within earshot of authority. Officially, it's called morning hygiene check. Unofficially, it's a weekly ritual of olfactory judgment, where your cleanliness or lack thereof is broadcast to the world. It begins with the prefect clipboard in hand, sweeping into the dorm, with a teacher or matron trailing behind. They move from bed to bed, lifting blankets, checking collar seams, and sniffing at the air like suspicious bloodhounds. No one escapes scrutiny. You sit up straight, smooth your shirt front, and quickly sniff under your own armpits. There's no time to cheat the system. Whatever you smell like now is what you will be judged on. When they reach you, the prefect gives a tight nod. She pinches your sleeve, lifts it slightly, and sniffs. Then comes the face cloth test. A square of cotton dabbed behind your ears. They examine it for grime. If it's gray or brown, you're getting a mark. If it's black, heaven help you, you pass barely. The boy next to you does not. He's sent to the airing line, a row of boys made to stand near the open window until inspection is complete. No shoes, no jackets. Just the chill morning air and everyone's silent judgment. The smell parade doesn't just measure cleanliness, it's a hierarchy definer. Clean boys get privileges, first dibs on pudding, extra reading time, permission to write home. Dirty boys get chores, snide remarks, or the dreaded sniff chart, an actual board posted near the entrance marking who has failed inspections too many times. You'd think this would encourage better hygiene. It does, sort of. But it also leads to some odd behaviors. Boys rub their armpits with lemons if they can sneak one from the kitchen. Others dust their bodies with flour or starch to absorb odors. One enterprising fellow even tried sprinkling himself with lavender foot powder. The result: he sneezed uncontrollably and was excused from math. The parade also exposes secrets. Hidden snacks, forbidden novels, even a contraband pet mouse once found beneath a bed during a particularly thorough inspection. His name was Parsnip. He was evicted. Historians still argue whether these parades truly improved health or merely perpetuated shame-based discipline. Some records suggest a drop in disease. Others claim students simply got better at faking it. There's also a gender divide. In girls' schools, the smell parade often included more floral touches, lavender handkerchiefs, rosewater spritzes, hair comb inspections. But the core idea remained. A clean child is a good child, or at least one with clean-looking socks. As the parade ends, the clipboard is marked and the inspectors move on. You exhale. Survival feels triumphant even if you still smell like damp wool and dorm room secrets. Later in class, you overhear whispers about next week's strategy. Someone claims to have a line on actual cologne. You doubt it, but hope smells sweet. At Victorian boarding school, the pursuit of cleanliness isn't just a moral expectation, it's also a punishment. You learn this the hard way when the boy across from you in the dining hall drops a spoon onto the floor and absent-mindedly pops it back in his mouth. He's seen. The matron scowls. No words. Just a finger jab toward the bucket closet. That's where they keep the brushes. Wooden-handled, iron-bristled beasts that scrape more than scrub. He returns 2 hours later, red-faced and dripping with vinegar, reeking of boiled lye and humiliation. His crime wasn't the spoon, it was filth. Or rather, the assumption of it. You're not immune. You quickly find out that the school has a rotating cast of hygiene monitors, older students deputized to enforce cleanliness infractions. Drop a handkerchief. You'll scrub the privy floors, spill your tea. You're on basin duty. Fail the smell chart twice. You're drafted into laundry wringer hell, hand-twisting soaked garments until your knuckles turn white. One boy sneezes during the morning hymn and is instantly assumed to be unclean. He's marched off to the washroom to scrub the basins as penance for his nose. When he returns, his shirt is soaked and streaked with green soap paste, his hair sticking up like a feather duster. The headmaster has a favorite phrase: clean hands, clean soul. It's printed in large Gothic letters above the washroom door. But everyone knows that cleaning here is rarely about health. It's about obedience. It's one thing to ask boys to stay clean. It's another to wield a mop like a scepter of moral judgment. In some cases, cleanliness punishment veers into the absurd. One poor soul is forced to wash all the doorknobs in the building with lemon water because he forgot to comb his hair. Another is made to polish the brass bed frames with vinegar and ash for accidentally stepping in a puddle. Historians still debate whether these punishments stemmed from genuine health concerns or served as convenient tools for classroom discipline. Many schools of the era conflated morality with hygiene, treating grime as evidence of laziness, dishonesty, or worse, rebellion. Cleanliness was character, and dirt was a threat to the institution's very order. Some students try to exploit the system. A few pretend to be extra dirty just to get out of Latin class. This backfires spectacularly when they are assigned detergent essays, 3 pages handwritten, on the importance of personal hygiene in moral upbringing. Every paragraph must begin with a quote from the Book of Proverbs. The younger boys quickly learn to fear the phrase, "You'll wash until the soap's gone." It's not hyperbole. There's one terrifying story of a monitor making a boy scrub the dormitory floor with his own pillowcase. Whether it's true or not, you never let your pillow touch the ground after that. Still, there are small acts of rebellion. Some boys deliberately oversuds the basins to flood the floors and accidentally wash away the inspector's chart. Others steal the brushes and toss them into the coal scuttle. Once, someone carves a tiny face into the soap bar, naming it Miss Clean and parading it in the dead of night atop a spoon throne. These are the little victories that make the whole ordeal bearable. They don't erase the welts from vinegar scrubbing or the shame of having your armpits sniffed in public. But they're a reminder. Cleanliness here may be weaponized, but you're still human underneath all that powdered starch. You can always tell who's in charge by how they smell. That might seem odd, but in the stiff hierarchy of Victorian boarding schools, authority is as much a scent as it is a voice. The headmaster walks past and leaves a trail of bay rum cologne and pipe tobacco. The senior matron, wrapped in heavy wool and always 10 steps ahead of disaster smells, sharply of lavender camphor and chalk dust. You know who to fear before you even see them. Their aroma is not accidental. In fact, it's cultivated. In a world where most students are lucky to rinse with cold water and shared soap stubs, the adults wear scent like a badge of power. Their fragrances, perfumed sachets, lemon balms, cloves rubbed into cuffs, mark them as above the grime of youth. They don't just control the rules of cleanliness. They embody the ideal you're meant to chase. Prefects, too, carry their own olfactory weight. Older students, especially the appointed monitors, often splash on rose water or rub crushed rosemary into their hair. One boy even carries a small brass vial of cologne from his father's shop in London. He uses it sparingly, dabbing a dot behind each ear before roll call. The effect: a command presence no one dares question. You notice how authority uses smell as social leverage. If you pass close to the matron, she might wrinkle her nose, not just from your state, but to remind you of hers. She doesn't have to say anything. A sniff is enough. Meanwhile, in chapel, the minister burns incense, not just for piety, but to mask the musky presence of 70 unwashed pupils in wool coats. It gives the room an almost surreal air, a mingling of frankincense and foot sweat. Even prayer smells strategic. Historians still argue whether this scented hierarchy had practical effects. Some claim it maintained discipline through sensory cues. Others suggest it simply reinforced class division, reminding poorer students that cleanliness, real fragrant cleanliness, was something they might never afford. What's certain is that the smell of authority becomes embedded in your memory. Years later, you might forget the layout of the school or the exact wording of Latin conjugations. But you'll remember the stern whiff of violet water and the sting of coal soap on your skin. One day, while polishing brass near the dormitory fireplace, you catch the scent of cinnamon. You turn and see Miss Withers, the young assistant teacher, gliding past with a stack of composition books. Her perfume is subtle, but sharp, and suddenly, half the room sits up straighter. The younger boys sniff their own collars and pretend not to be impressed. That's power. Smell is the unspoken language of this place. When a teacher passes close and doesn't flinch, it's a compliment. When a prefect hands you a bar of soap just because it's a warning. And when the headmaster himself pauses, looks you over, and says, "Decent," without twitching his nose, that's practically a knighthood. Of course, not every scent is deliberate. The kitchens reek of stewed onions and suet. The infirmary smells like liniment and despair. But in the world of student and staff alike, there is an understanding to smell good is to be good, or at least to be better. And so you begin to notice your own scent more often. You find ways to freshen up, dabbing vinegar behind your ears, keeping mint leaves tucked in your socks, even stealing a pinch of powdered chalk from the blackboard tray to pat down your hair. Doesn't always work, but for a fleeting second when a teacher walks by and doesn't recoil, you feel clean, almost respected, almost in charge. Teeth cleaning at a Victorian boarding school is inventive. You're introduced to it on your second day when a wiry boy named Ellis pulls out a small tin marked Dr. Gribble's Antiseptic Dentifrice. It looks like a snuff box, smells like burnt mint and crushed eggshells, and has been passed through 3 older brothers. The lid creaks open to reveal a chalky gray dust. Ellis offers you a pinch in exchange for half your pudding. You hesitate. He shrugs. Suit yourself. But you'll be on wood ash duty tomorrow if your gums go green. Thus begins your entry into the underground world of tooth powder trading. The school technically provides a communal tin of tooth powder in each dormitory washroom. Unsurprisingly, it's always half empty, vaguely damp, and questionably gray. No one knows what it's made of. Some claim it's just brick dust mixed with soot. Others think it's from the local chemist's experimental shelf. Whatever the ingredients, it stings your gums and tastes like burnt coins. Naturally, an economy develops. Certain boys bring their own powders from home, and suddenly, you have currency. Ellis's tin is one variety. Another boy has something that smells like cloves and chalk. The fanciest tin in circulation is rose-scented and came from France. It's worth at least a full biscuit and 2 ink cartridges per dab. Morning routine becomes a black market bazaar. Behind the washroom door, boys whisper deals, swap tins, and inspect powder grain like jewelers. Some even blend their own mixtures, wood ash, salt, mint leaves, crushed under boots, and the occasional sprinkle of licorice root. Brushing is performed with stiff hog bristle brushes, some cracked, many inherited. They're not sold or traded too personal. But powder, that's shareable wealth. Of course, not every attempt ends well. One unfortunate lad tries to create his own citrus blend using lemon peel vinegar and crushed chalk. The result bubbles like a cauldron and singes his tongue. He's called Tooth Witch for a week. Historians still argue how effective these DIY dentifrices were. Some Victorian powders, they say, likely did more harm than good, scraping enamel, irritating gums, introducing bacteria. Yet in an age of sweetened gruel and no dental visits, they were better than nothing. Tooth inspection isn't official, but everyone knows bad teeth bring shame. If your breath could fell a prefect at 5 paces, you'll be teased for months. So boys go to absurd lengths. One wraps his tin in a sock to keep it pure. Another tapes his to the underside of his bed with sealing wax. There's also a myth: if you use too much powder, your teeth will fall out overnight. It's nonsense, of course. But one morning, a boy does show up missing a molar. No one asks questions. The trading slows for a week. Eventually, you get your own tin. Not new, but yours. It comes from a departing student who graduates to grammar school and leaves it behind with a smirk. Inside is a mix of peppermint burnt shell and something unidentifiable. You treasure it like gold. That night, you use it for the first time. It tastes awful. It feels gritty, but afterward, your mouth tingles, and for once, doesn't taste like old stew. You smile in the mirror, and for a fleeting moment, you feel like a Victorian gentleman rather than a dorm-ridden ragamuffin. The next morning, Ellis eyes your tin and raises an eyebrow. "Trade you," he says. You smile wider. Not a chance. Your bed at boarding school is narrow, creaky, and at first glance reasonably tidy. But soon you learn that appearances are everything. The linen, while tucked with soldierly precision, hides a grim reality. It hasn't been washed in weeks, possibly months. There are 3 layers. The bottom, a straw-stuffed, ticking mattress. Crunchy, itchy, and full of mystery bumps. The middle, a sheet once white, now pale gray, with a suspicious map of stains. And the top, a thin wool blanket, pilled and scratchy, smelling faintly of wet stone and paraffin. Together, they create what the dorm matron calls a hygienic sleep system. You have your doubts. Officially, linens are changed every 2 weeks. Unofficially, it depends on weather, laundry weight, and matron mood. If the laundry quota hasn't been reached, or the washerwoman has slipped on the frosty cobbles again, your bed might go unchanged for a full term, which is why inspections matter. Once a week, the bed check arrives. Sheets are peeled back, seams examined, and pillowcases lifted like forensic evidence. But they're not looking for wrinkles. They're looking for lice. Tiny black specks moving fast mean disaster. The entire bed is then stripped and carted off to the boiler room, while the unlucky sleeper is relocated to the itch bench in the hallway and given a ration of coal tar ointment. You learn the tricks quickly. Always air your pillow. Always fluff your blanket. And always shake your sheet before lights out. If you catch a louse early, you might escape a full inspection. If not, you risk having your mattress propped up against the wall with your undergarments hung out for public scrutiny. There's a particular horror known as the quarantine quilt, a massive wool monstrosity reserved for boys whose beds were found severely infested. It's rumored to be older than the headmaster and smells like damp mushrooms. No one sleeps under it by choice. Some boys form linen alliances. I'll air your sheet if you iron my collar, they promise. Others turn competitive. The cleanest bed earns a blue ribbon and 10 minutes extra recess. Once a boy made a linen decoy stuffing a second blanket underneath to fake plushness. It worked until the matron leaned in and found the scent of mildew unbearable. There's a subtle class element, too. Boys from wealthier homes often bring private linen, embroidered initials, softer cotton, the occasional monogrammed pillowcase. These become status symbols guarded fiercely. One unfortunate lost his fine sheets to a prank and had to sleep for a week under an itchy horse blanket. Revenge was swift and poetic, involving pepper in slippers. Historians still argue whether these linen rituals were genuinely effective or just another layer of performative cleanliness. Some claim lice outbreaks decreased with the rise of regimented bedding schedules. Others suggest most cleaning efforts were cosmetic, a way to appease anxious parents rather than truly sanitize. You adapt. You learn to fold your blanket tightly, hide the worst stains under your pillow, and sprinkle crushed bay leaves between the sheets to ward off insects. Whether it works is questionable, but it smells nice and makes you feel like you're doing something. Eventually, you stop thinking of your bed as a place of rest. It becomes a battlefield in the war against dirt. Every morning is a reassembly of defenses. Every night a gamble against crawling invaders. But some evenings, with the blanket tucked tight and a faint breeze wafting in from the cracked dorm window, your pillow even smells a little like lavender, probably from your bunkmate's stolen sachet. Still, you close your eyes and pretend for one peaceful moment that your linen is clean, your conscience clearer, and no lice lurk beneath the seams. Cleanliness might be next to godliness, but in Victorian boarding school, it's definitely next to the cane rack. You discover this when one of the younger boys, small, nervous, constantly adjusting his socks, is marched out of morning assembly. His crime, smelling like a compost heap, according to the prefect. He returns an hour later, red-eyed and limping slightly, with a suspicious shine on his shoes that doesn't match the rest of him. The message is clear. Being dirty isn't just shameful, it's punishable. It starts with demerits. Fail a smell check. That's 1. Found with a soiled collar. That's 2. 3 demerits in a week, and you're assigned special duties. A euphemism for the grimiest, least dignified tasks the school can invent. Emptying chamber pots, scrubbing washroom floors with a vinegar rag, hauling coal for the boiler, polishing the dining hall cutlery using a sock and sand. It's all fair game. Do it badly, and you move to Tier 2 corporal motivation. Punishments range from light encouragements like extra lines, "I shall not sleep in dirty drawers," scrawled 100 times, to the infamous soap drill. In this charming ritual, boys must stand barefoot on the stone washroom floor, balancing a bar of slimy soap on their heads while reciting hygiene maxims. Drop the soap. Start over. You're warned early. Don't be caught with stained cuffs. That's considered willful neglect. There's one boy, Ferguson, who failed to keep his socks clean 3 days in a row. They made him wear a sign to chapel, "I am the enemy of soap." It became a dorm-wide cautionary tale. And then there's the cane, reserved for repeat offenders or those who mock the hygiene rules openly. One poor soul made a joke about bathing in gravy. He was caned and made to write an essay on the sanitary virtues of cold water with his less dominant hand. Historians still debate whether such punishments actually produced cleaner children or simply more creative liars. Some scholars point out that public shaming led to social discipline. Others argue it bred resentment rebellion and a lifelong aversion to wash basins. There are loopholes, of course. The wealthier boys often get second chances. A smudge on their trousers is a misstep. For the poorer students, it's moral decay. You learn to keep a stiff brush tucked under your mattress and to wash your face thoroughly, especially on inspection days, even if it means scrubbing with icy water until your cheeks sting. Some punishments are more psychological. The filth bench is a real thing. A single wooden seat outside the dorm, painted brown, where unclean boys must sit during recreation time. You're allowed to watch others play, but not join. After 3 turns on the bench, your name is added to the shame roster posted near the matron's office. And yet, amidst the harshness, there's a twisted camaraderie. Older boys quietly pass down tips: how to rub soap shavings into socks to fake freshness, how to fold collars to hide yellowing, how to blow on your palms before a smell check so they seem just washed. You take notes, you adapt. Punishment here doesn't always fit the grime, but it shapes you slowly. You flinch at muddy footprints, you panic at stray crumbs, and you start scrubbing with a kind of nervous pride, clean, not just to avoid trouble, but to prove you belong. One evening, you catch your reflection in the window. Shirt mostly clean, hair brushed, socks aired, and for once, the prefect walks by and says nothing. No scowl, no sniff, no clipboard. It feels like a prize. You hear about them in whispers, boys who somehow always smell just a bit fresher, whose shirts have a faint lather scent, who never seem to fail the dreaded smell check. You suspect they're cheating the system. You're not wrong. They call themselves the Lather League, or at least that's the name passed around during whispered, late-night conversations beneath itchy wool blankets. Their specialty: acquiring extra soap in a place where a single bar is hoarded like treasure. You first encounter the club indirectly when a bar of harsh yellow soap disappears from the communal washroom basin overnight. The next morning, your basin mate has suspiciously shiny hands and a smug grin. Coincidence? Definitely not. Membership is elusive, but the signs are there. But with cleaner cuffs, softer skin, a suspicious knowledge of rose-scented hand washes, and always, that faint trace of stolen luxury clinging to their collar seams. You learn the rules over time. The first never steal a full bar. That's too obvious. The method is to chip off just a flake. A sliver here, a corner there. Wrapped in cloth, smuggled in pockets, or melted into a paste and stashed in hollowed-out ink pots. The second rule: trade, don't hoard. Soap in excess makes you a target. Soap shared makes you a legend. Third, silence is survival. Get caught, and your punishment won't be just school-issued. You'll find your boots missing your bed, turned upside down, your toothbrush scrubbed across the privy floor. One of the older boys, nicknamed Lie, is rumored to run the whole operation. He's never dirty, never fails inspection. His trunk, it's said, contains a secret compartment with wrapped packets of Marseille soap smuggled in by a cousin who works in a shipping yard. You never see him use it. but his pillow always smells faintly of lemon and basil. Why do they do it? Not greed, not exactly. In a world where soap is rationed and grime is shame, cleanliness becomes power. It buys favors, respect, even affection. More than once, you've seen a prefect pause by a boy with freshly scrubbed hands and offer him a less terrible chore. Historians still argue whether these little rebellions, the soap heists, the trading rings, the clever hoaxes were acts of resistance, or just survival tactics in a system obsessed with order. Either way, they were real and vital. The League even has emergency stashes hidden throughout the school, behind loose floorboards, in unused flue vents. One time, a flake was found hidden inside a chalk box, perfectly camouflaged. No one confessed. The matron called it witchery. The boys called it genius. You never officially join, but one night a folded handkerchief appears on your bed. Inside is a small circular disc of lavender soap, pressed flat like a coin. There's no note, just that quiet gift. It means someone noticed your effort, your silent struggle with the vinegar rags and ice-cold basins. You've been seen. You're in. You don't spend it right away. You carry it for days, rubbing it between your fingers like a lucky talisman. When you finally use it, it lathers fast and smells like spring. For a brief moment, as the scent clings to your sleeves and the grime melts off your hands, you feel triumphant. You feel clean. Not clean as the school defines it, but clean on your own terms. Soap, after all, isn't just for scrubbing, it's for surviving. By now, you've learned that clean at Victorian boarding school doesn't necessarily mean not dirty. It often just means not smelly in the wrong way. This is the essence of the myth of good smell, a potent, ever-shifting belief that if you can mask your scent, you've masked your sins. Take the hallway sachets, for example. Small cloth bags filled with dried herbs, lavender bay leaves, rosemary, tucked in boots hung on bedposts or stuffed inside coat sleeves. You'd think they were spiritual talismans. In truth, they're odor armor. If your coat reeks of peppermint, who's going to lean in for a real sniff? Then there's vinegar water splashed behind the ears like perfume. Soap flakes rubbed dry onto wrists and patted flat. Bits of lemon peel carried in handkerchiefs. Some boys chew cloves during inspections. Others rub flower petals onto their necks with the solemnity of a ritual. The goal isn't to be clean, it's to seem clean. Authority figures play along. The matron has a fondness for boys who smell herbal. One teacher praises a wholesome scent without ever specifying what that means. If you smell sharp and floral, you're praised. Smell earthy, and you're watched. Smell sour, and you're punished. It's not about soap, it's about strategy. One boy, Percy, becomes legendary for passing 8 inspections in a row with what he calls a bouquet of deception. His secret: a blend of crushed mint pencil shavings and the faintest dab of his sister's hair pomade. He smells like an herb garden caught on fire, and no one questions him. The myth persists because it's useful. If cleanliness is subjective, then power lies in presentation. You start paying attention to how the cleanest boys actually behave. They scrub less, but air their shirts. They wash infrequently, but always during high traffic hours when they'll be seen. Their efforts are theater, and the audience is always watching. Historians still debate how this performative cleanliness shaped moral expectations in Victorian schools. Some argue it encouraged creativity and resilience. Others say it trained children to deceive, to value image over substance. Perhaps it did both. You try the tricks yourself. You start carrying a mint sprig tucked into your waistband. You fold your handkerchief with visible care, even if it hasn't touched water in days. You hum while brushing your teeth, not because you enjoy it, but because it sounds diligent. It works. One morning, the matron passes by and mutters, "Fresh enough." You beam. Fresh, not clean, not pure, not even well washed. Just fresh enough. It's a victory. The myth evolves too. Some boys begin writing fake letters home about new hygiene routines, hoping they'll be quoted at the next school assembly. One even crafts a poem, "Lavender, oh lavender. Cloak my sins in scent." It makes the rounds. For a week, everyone hums it in the washroom. Of course, the truth lingers beneath it all. No amount of lavender can hide lice. No clove chewed in secret can erase the damp mildew of a 2-week-old sheet. But the myth offers hope, the comforting fiction. In a world where water is cold, soap is rationed, and cleanliness is currency. So you keep playing the part. You fluff your pillow, pat your collar, and swipe the basil leaf you've hidden in your desk drawer across your forehead. It smells like summer. Briefly, then it fades. But that brief moment is enough to carry you through another day in the theater of hygiene. Teachers at your Victorian boarding school do many things: deliver dull lectures, assign impossible Latin translations, confiscate illicit toffees, but their most persistent job, it seems, is ensuring you smell tolerable and look less like a chimney sweep. Clean habits aren't merely suggested, they're enforced with near military precision. Each morning, just after the bell and before breakfast, the dormitories undergo quick visual. It sounds harmless. It is not. A prefect or junior master strides through the room with a brass clipboard and a nose like a hunting hound. His goal: identify the slackers. Is your collar stained? Are your boots unpolished? Does your hair shine with anything other than the shine of God-fearing soap? Then comes the touch check. That's when a teacher, without warning, brushes your sleeve between finger and thumb. Too rough. You get a note. Too slick. You get a lecture. Just right. You might earn a rare grunt of approval. You start to internalize their cues. Mr. Langley's mustache twitches when he spots an unbrushed shoe. Miss Dunmore taps her ruler 3 times if your fingernails show dirt. And if you hear nothing from Matron Hardwick, it means she's saving her wrath for chapel. And then there are the shaming charts, tacked on cork boards beside the laundry lists, and Latin conjugation posters. These cleanliness boards feature names, ranks, and crimes Jones. Uncombed hair, ransom, mildew smell, Pevensey, unknown stain. Points are deducted. Recess time is revoked. Reputations are permanently injured. Teachers also enforce hygiene by praise, though it's rarer than soap on a Sunday. You once saw a boy receive a gold star sticker for exemplary ear cleanliness. The dorm buzzed about it for a week. He traded that star for 2 figs and a look of eternal smugness. You quickly learn that cleaning isn't just about avoiding filth, it's about avoiding inspection. Some teachers carry smell diaries where they jot down offenses for future reference. Others wield more medieval tools like the dreaded sniff test, an impromptu exam where you must raise your arms and pray you remembered to stuff your shirt with rosemary last night. Historians still debate the pedagogical value of these rituals. Were they meant to instill lifelong hygiene or merely terrify children into conformity? Evidence suggests both. Diaries from former students mention a lifelong aversion to unpolished shoes and to authority figures with twitching mustaches. Occasionally, enforcement goes theatrical. Mr. Densbury, the eccentric science master, once demonstrated soap's efficacy by pouring pig's blood over a white shirt, then scrubbing it clean with ash and lime. Everyone clapped, then realized he expected them to do the same with their own cuffs by Friday. At other times, teachers stage hygiene drills. A whistle blows. Everyone must rush to the washroom soap up and return with visibly damp faces. Woe to the dry-cheeked. They're branded as dodgers and handed scrub buckets. Some rules seem arbitrary. One teacher insists all pupils comb their hair north to south. Another sniffs books before returning them, checking for musty fingerprints. It's unclear what that means, but no one argues. Still, a few teachers genuinely care. Miss Dunmore, once she's done tapping, her ruler offers balm for cracked hands. Mr. Plimsworth discreetly hands out fresh linen to boys whose home parcels never arrive. Their kindness softens the harshness like warm water on a frostbitten morning. And so you adapt. You carry a nail brush in your pencil case. You memorize the top 5 aromas matron likes. You learn that sometimes the best way to pass a hygiene check is to smile politely, breathe through your nose, and hope the teacher's olfactory sense is slightly dulled from too many hours in the ink-stained classroom. Because, in the end, cleanliness here isn't just enforced. It's examined, categorized, weaponized, and occasionally rewarded. You keep your collar straight, your boots shined, and your soap tucked safely beneath your mattress like a secret weapon. You'd think falling ill in a Victorian boarding school might earn you a reprieve from hygiene rules. A soft bed, warm broth, perhaps even a gentle towel dabbed on the forehead. You would be wrong. Getting sick is just a fast track into the most ironically clean place in the building, the infirmary. At first glance, the infirmary seems like an upgrade. It has curtains. Linens are changed weekly, imagine, and the basins contain actual warm water. For a second, you almost hope for a minor fever. But then you remember the other side of it, the itching powders, the cough elixirs that taste like old shoes and Sister Boniface, the school nurse who inspects you with a stare that could peel wallpaper. You're sent there after fainting in Latin class more from hunger than illness, though no one asks. The moment your forehead feels warm, you're quarantined. Not for your protection, mind you, but for the school's. The nurse doesn't want disease spreading, and dirt is always the first suspect. The bed you're assigned is oddly pristine. You wonder if anyone's ever actually slept in it. White sheets, ironed pillow, a faint smell of carbolic soap clinging to everything. It's the cleanest place you've been since arriving. Before you're allowed to lie down, however, there's the cleansing. Strip to your drawers, Sister Boniface commands. You comply, shivering on the cold tiles. She scrubs your arms and neck with a rag soaked in vinegar and bay water. It stings. Then your fingernails are checked, your feet inspected, and your toothbrush confiscated for reboiling. In here, cleanliness is king. You're allowed to sponge yourself with warm water once a day, an unthinkable luxury in the dormitories. Your clothes are removed and replaced with a stiff gown that rustles like wax paper. It's ghastly, but sterile. There's no smell of coal dust, no mold, no sour socks. Just lavender oil and antiseptic fear. But the clean air comes with quiet horror. Boys don't talk much here. Those with fevers moan softly in the corners. Others just stare at the ceiling waiting for clearance. The nurse patrols with her cane tapping the floor. Tap, tap, sniff. Tap, tap, scrub. You hear stories whispered behind the gauze curtains. One boy got sent home with sanitation fatigue. Another faked measles just to get hot water on demand. Then there's the tale of the boy who tried to stay longer by smearing jam on his pillow to attract ants. He was caught and made to polish chamber pots with his toothbrush. It never returned to him. Historians still argue whether infirmaries at Victorian schools helped prevent outbreaks or simply relocated them behind tidy curtains. Many were cleaner than the dormitories, but only just. Some even doubled as detention rooms when not full. Clean, yes, but comforting, not quite. Eventually, you're deemed stable and return to the regular dorm, blinking in the murky light, clutching your disinfected shoes. Your classmates eye you warily, but with envy too. They sniff once, then nod. You've brought the smell of the infirmary back with you, antiseptic lavender, and just a hint of smugness. For a brief few hours, you walk the halls as the cleanest boy in the school. You can almost hear the matron sigh in relief when you pass. But by the next morning, the dorm has reclaimed you. Your sheets are stiff, your collar's gone musty, and the basin water ice again. Still, you remember the warmth, the soft towel, the luxury of lather. And as you pull on your faded socks and smooth your shirt, you vow one thing. Next time you fall ill, you're going to make sure it lasts just one day longer. The term ends with the usual ceremony. Stiff farewells, a Latin benediction, and stale mince pies. You're handed your luggage overstuffed and oddly heavier than you remember, and herded toward carriages that will ferry you home. A long, rattling ride later, you arrive at your front gate. But before your mother can even greet you properly, she wrinkles her nose. "You smell like boiled dust," she says, not unkindly. And so begins the holiday hygiene horror. You thought you'd adjusted to the school's grimy equilibrium. The vinegar washes, the sock rotations, the desperate sachets of rosemary. But the moment you step into your clean, sunlit home, the truth hits hard. You are filthy. Utterly, profoundly, head to toe, unclean. It starts with the bath. You're marched upstairs and ordered to soak. Not just a rinse, an actual bath with hot water and soap that foams without coaxing. At first it feels divine. Then the scrubbing starts. Your mother mutters about school standards as she attacks your elbows with a flannel. You emerge pink, dazed, and several layers lighter. Next comes the laundry. Every item you brought home is immediately condemned. Socks are boiled, Shirts are double starched. Even your satchel is hung in the garden to be purified by air. You watch your belongings flap in the wind like penitents. Then there's the hair. It's doused in lemon rinse, then combed so vigorously you suspect your scalp will join the debris on the brush. Lice inspection, your aunt announces, peering into your part like a hawk eyeing prey. You pass, but only just. She recommends castor oil just in case. Your siblings are fascinated and repelled. They poke at your uniform, marvel at the calluses on your hands, and listen in horror to tales of chamber pots and soap thieves. One demands to know if you were ever flogged for smelly feet. You confirm proudly. But the worst part, realizing how low your standards have fallen. At school, brushing with burnt chalk seemed fine. Sharing a towel with 4 boys, normal. Here, you're offered fresh linen, daily hot water on command and soap that smells like honeysuckle. It feels excessive, almost suspicious. Historians note that returning boarders often experienced reverse cleanliness, shock, a term found in private diaries, never in official records. One boy wrote, "I feared the kitchen towels were too white to touch." Another reported dreams of the matron scolding him from inside a laundry basket. You sympathize. At meals, you fumble with clean forks. Your posture slouches from months of dorm stools. You hesitate before using a napkin, unsure whether it's decorative or allowed. Your family watches with concern as you automatically sniff your armpit before dessert. By week's end, the transformation is complete. Your hair is glossy. Your skin no longer itches. Your toenails are properly filed. And yet, something's off. You miss the grumble of early morning washrooms, the crackle of shared towels, the secret thrill of slipping a stolen soap chip under your pillow. Then, just before returning to school, your mother folds a lavender sachet into your satchel. For the smell, she says. You nod, hiding a grin. You'll share it with Ellis, of course. When the carriages roll back through the iron gates and the dormitory groans awake once more, with the rattle of boots and the smell of mothballs, it all comes flooding back. You're home, or something like it. The clean, holiday version of you slowly recedes, replaced once more by the soap-stashing, vinegar-dabbing, towel-haggling survivor the school molded. But as the new term unfolds, you notice something unexpected. You've brought habits back with you. You start folding your shirts more neatly, brushing your nails without being asked, even checking your socks for residual dampness, as Matron Hardwick would say. The system worked. Not in the way they wanted, perhaps, but still it stuck. The legacy of hygiene education in Victorian boarding schools isn't one of sparkle and shine. It's a strange blend of discipline, theater fear, and begrudging routine. You were taught that cleanliness equaled character, that grime meant moral failure, and that a clean collar could carry you farther than a clever remark. You didn't just learn how to wash, you learned how to be seen washing. And yet, looking around, you realize your fellow students have changed too. Ellis now air dries his toothbrush. Percy has turned the mint leaf into a daily ritual. Even the infamously grubby Ferguson has adopted a sock rotation system involving a complex chart pinned beneath his bed. Historians often debate what these schools truly taught. Were they civilizing institutions or factories of conformity? Did they instill hygiene for health's sake or for control? Most agree it was both. Cleanliness, after all, was about more than bodies. It was about order, visibility, and survival in a world obsessed with appearances. But beyond all that, something lingers deeper. A weird kind of camaraderie born from shared soap and shame. A sense of pride in knowing how to polish boots with a banana peel, or how to sterilize a comb with tea. These weren't just school tricks. They were resilience lessons disguised as hygiene. And so, as you roll your blanket just the way they taught, hide a chip of soap in your sock heel for emergencies, and nod solemnly at the first smell chart of the term you feel strangely ready, not just to survive, but to out-clean, outsmart, and outshine. Just a little. Because in the end, Victorian hygiene wasn't really about being spotless. It was about being prepared. And now, let's slow everything down. The lanterns are dim. The dormitory is quiet, save for the soft breath of sleeping boys and the occasional creak of wooden bedposts settling into silence. Outside, the wind brushes the frosted windows, a gentle lullaby carried across the rooftops. You lie back under your rough wool blanket, its familiar weight a strange kind of comfort. Your sheets may not be fresh, your shirt may be stiff with starch, but your hands are clean enough. And tonight, that's more than enough. Your thoughts drift to the smell of lavender sachets, the hiss of vinegar on tile, the crunch of frost in the wash basin. Each memory a thread in the odd patchwork quilt of your boarding school life. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't gentle, but it was something real, something you endured and shaped, and even found your own small pride within. Let yourself drift now back through the long hallways, the echoing footsteps, the faint scent of lye soap and ink, back to the basin where you learned to splash fast and shiver quietly, back to the bunk where you hid your finest chip of pilfered Marseille soap. Breathe in one long, slow inhale. Let the weight of the day fall away. Let the school fade into the fog of sleep, where smell charts are folded away, and the matron's footsteps vanish in the soft hush of dreams. You made it through another term. You found your rhythm, your rituals, your way. But before you disappear into your squeaky clean reality, pause. What shocked you most in this bizarre, grimy, gloriously unhygienic world? Was it the vinegar baths that stung like truth? The shared toothbrush that haunted your soul? Or maybe the noble act of bathing in someone else's sock soup? Tell me in the comments. I don't just read them, I live for them. Your reply might just end up in the next video. And if this strange journey made you silently thank your shower head, smash that subscribe button like you're slapping a bar of 1850s lye soap, because next time we're diving into something even crazier, weirder, and more unforgettable. And trust me, if you miss it, someone else will be the one saying, "Did you see that video?"